have known each other for a few years, and I've asked her this question many times, including by email today, but am I saying your name correctly?
Yes.
I am.
I think I heard. Now I answer to anything.
Helena.
Yes, Helena.
Yes,
perfect.
Good. Fantastic. That's
got
a
that
good
one
start.
out of the way.
Okay. So the reason that Helena is up here, and the reason that we've wanted to do an interview with her for so many years at this event, and thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Helena is CEO of Newton Investment Management, which manages over 50 billion pounds of assets for its clients. And we also named Helena this year, just a couple of months ago, to our list of 50 world's greatest leaders, which I nominated you.
Thank you, Patty.
And I called Helena, and we had it, and I wrote up the little blurb. But the reason, just being the head, the CEO of a $50 billion asset manager is not enough to get you on this list. The reason we put her on the list is because she is a pioneer and an evangelist and the founder of the 30% Club, which has made such an enormous difference in the last few years. 2011, was it that you started?
2010.
2010.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it, but setting the goal for UK boards to have 30% female representation. You've made so much progress, Helena. And the other reason we put her on the list, frankly, is she has 9 children.
I spilt the beans so early on in our conversation.
Now, they are how old now, your children?
From 6 to 23.
6 to 23.
Yeah, 6 girls, 3 boys. Keeps me busy.
So, you joined Newton in 1994. You started as a global bond analyst at Schroders. So you've been in one place for a long time. I guess your life needs a certain level of stability.
Yeah, you don't want to make too many life changes all at once. No, it's been, and obviously I've evolved in my role, going from the desk, running a bond funds, to running the company is quite a change. Even though I've been doing this job for quite some time, obviously nothing stays the same in markets, and been interesting.
So Helena, what has been your overarching career philosophy? And as you have, we talk about, I speak about women in power, and I say that women tend to view power horizontally. Men tend to view power more vertically. This is a woman who clearly views power horizontally. You're doing a lot of things. So what is your overarching career philosophy and your overarching life philosophy?
Well, I think, in fact, I spoke at something the other day that was aimed at young women coming through, which is something I spend quite a lot of my time doing. And it was actually entitled Make Your Own Luck. And I thought afterwards, that's kind of what's happened to me, really. Not perhaps with, perfect foresight. I didn't realize as I took roles and made them bigger, or, I kind of made my own seat at the table with hindsight early on in my career without really the invitation. But I guess trying to work well with people around me. And I found people have always responded quite well if you are not in any way militant about the next stage in your career, but just kind of contributing and looking for the next position. So with hindsight, I think I've made my own luck to quite a degree. But I've also been quite flexible, and I realize now, and that is, you mentioned the word horizontal in terms of how we work. I think, we women, and it's not just stereotyping, but neuroscience suggests this as well. We tend to like to build consensus. We tend to like to collaborate. Some aspects of that, I think, are now much more valued by companies throughout the world as technology and globalization, I think, have shifted power from being vertical to horizontal more. But I guess now I recognize with hindsight that I tended to build a consensus around me, tend to collaborate with others, and then they would believe in you and want to follow you. So I didn't do that in any contrived way, I hasten to add, but with hindsight, I think that's really what's happened to me.
Mm-hmm. And there's probably no better example of the power of collaboration than the 30% Club, which is explained to probably most or many women in this room know, at least the women who are from England, know what this is all about, but explain how you are striving to reach 30% female board representation?
So there's a couple of really distinguishing characteristics about 30% Club. One is that we're working with men. So this is working, not a battle of the sexes. This is actually as far away from that as possible to be. This is saying we're trying to create better businesses, actually move beyond the boardroom now to all stages of the pipeline, as everyone likes to call it. Although I never really like that expression. It implies we're going to be marched down a sort of like a toothpaste tube or something. I'm experimenting with the word ecosystem. We're trying to create an ecosystem in companies that's more nurturing of all types of talent, and in turn we can contribute to it. So that part has been quite distinct. And then, of course, what we've not been trying to do is anything territorial, trying to say we own this space. It's been much more, there are some fantastic initiatives out there already. Let's see if we can work together, and as well as providing some cohesion, then where can we fill the gaps? So, for example, we now run a big cross-company mentoring scheme that the second year, 22 companies and organizations, including the public sector, have been involved in. And the next cohort will probably be about between 30 and 35 companies. And what this was about, I thought maybe the world doesn't need another mentoring scheme. It's all been demand-driven. So people have come to me and said, please, can you set up this aspect? It's a bit exhausting really that way. But anyway, we get somebody else to help set up. And people who've been mentored, these are aimed at mid-career women who perhaps getting to that danger zone when their careers are perhaps diverging from their male colleagues. And they've said it's very liberating being able to be mentored by someone outside their own organization. And the men who are the mentors, 2/3 of our mentors are men, have said it's opened their eyes as to the issues facing the women, presumably in their own organizations that they wouldn't be aware of. So filling the gaps that there wasn't before, because often it was done by a diversity business. And I think making this more of a business issue, making this a mainstream issue. Yes, I'm passionate about equality, but actually we've got people's ears and attention and commitment and action around it because it's seen as a business, good business practice now.
I want to go back to the origin of the 30% Club in 2010. What was the spark that caused you to start this?
Well, I have to confess, I was a little bit disillusioned. I was already doing a women's development network initiative within my own company, which is owned by BMI Mellon, which Eliana is part of. And actually, we had great feedback from events, and people said how inspiring, but it didn't seem to inspire anyone to do anything. You know, I looked around, and even though we always invited men, I could see no perceptible difference in terms of the numbers of women making it through, the ones we were retaining or attracting back from maternity. So then I was invited to speak at Goldman's Diversity Week in 2009. And afterwards, there was a lunch, probably about 15 organizations involved, not all financial services. And I listened, I thought, wow, we're all doing something wrong because everyone's trying so hard, and yet we have so little to show for it. Came away from that, and obviously it didn't occur to me overnight what that was, but I realized that we were all, sort of, I suppose, whistling in the dark. We didn't have a goal. We didn't have a measurable target. Now, I'm very anti-quotas, and we can perhaps talk about that, but having, we run our businesses with objectives and with deadlines around those objectives, so having some clear goals, and then secondly, involving men, the people in power. Let's just be honest about it. We couldn't do this by women talking to each other all the time. We needed to involve men. 30%, by the way, is critical mass point. It's obviously not parity, but given that we were at about 12% women on FTSE boards at the time, it seemed a high enough aspiration. And that was kind of how that all started, and had a few enlightened chair supporters, 7 founding chair supporters, all men, all of whom got it, many of whom have daughters. Made it personal for them. They were at that age that their daughters were coming through, being fantastically well educated, working for great companies, and yet not getting on as far as their
So
sons.
it was 12.5% female representation on FTSE boards in 2011, 23.5%.
Well, apparently, any day now, it's going to be announced to be 25%.
Fantastic.
I met Nikki Morgan from earlier this week, and everyone's known it's a matter of sort of days, if not weeks. So Elise will have met already Lord Davis's goal of 25% women on FTSE boards. And we work very closely with the Davis Committee. So that's an important part of the equation.
And when are we going to get to 30?
Okay, well, I'm hoping everyone doesn't stop and say, oh, well, we've done that, been there, done that. We've got a few more women on the board. I've suggested that the government adopt maybe a 30% goal for the first half of this parliament, but I actually think we'll get there by the middle of next year. I think we've got momentum now. It's just important that people don't think, okay, check that box. We've done the women on board thing. And obviously, all of the work of the 30% Club now really is about sustaining the momentum and around, the executive management teams where there are far fewer women than, say, on the boards, and going beyond that.
How did you have to hone your approach here? Is there anything that you did, not quite right initially that you had to change to make yourself more effective at this?
Yeah, I think that, it was a little bit trial and error. What was something quite interesting, but the third piece, of saying we need to target involving the men, the third piece really was being quite vague about how we were going to do it. And that sounds like an awful admission of something, but actually, and newspapers described us as, Evening Standard said, we're worthy ambition, but very vague about how we're going to achieve it. But I actually realized that made us open. So we did listen. I think with hindsight, we got off to a bit of a slow start, and I see that now with 30% clubs around the world. Often it takes a bit of time to work out what are those levers of change, what are those real interventions that will work culturally, that will get people gathering around this. This is not, say, imposing a regime on people. So I understand now, in fact, one of the chairmen said to me a little bit recently, he said, oh, well, you lulled us into a false sense of security. We thought you were part of the establishment. You sounded like you're one of us. And then you've been very disruptive. And actually, I suppose I thought, no, I said, that's a good thing, isn't it? And then he said, well, yeah, I suppose it was a bit of a conjuring trick really to pull off to get them to want what I wanted. So that part I wouldn't have changed, and I think has been quite important as well. So.
I mean, Helena has been remarkably effective, and she has been written about in the press as, she's taken a really nice approach, which is so interesting. I don't know if you saw, did you just see the interview with Carolyn McCall?
Sadly, right? I arrived just as we were starting but I've just chatted to her in the green room.
Oh, okay. Well, she, she's a very nice person. She seemed very nice to me. But she was the only female CEO in the Glassdoor list of most liked CEOs in the UK by employees. She's a nice person, which is, nice women, nice leaders do sometimes finish first. I mean, I actually think, not to be obsequious, but I think that's a little bit of a lesson here. You are expanding, you have expanded the 30% Club to the US, Hong Kong, Ireland, South Africa. You were just in Australia last month, right? Launching it there. What do you tell people in foreign countries about the key thing to do to make this work in your country?
Well, first of all, I should explain as well, we're not going around looking for world domination just for the sake of it. This is countries coming and saying, actually, we've not been able to see the breakthrough that you've had in the UK. Could you help share some of the things that have helped get the breakthrough and we'll copy it if it works. So what we've suggested always is that you need a cadre, you need a tight band of really committed business leaders, men and women, who are absolutely determined to be accountable for the change, but also to encourage their peers. That, I think, has been a bit like creating a wave. It makes it sound a bit simple. But what I found originally, and actually I forgot now, this was a big mistake I made early on. I was told by one chairman that he was very disappointed that he hadn't been asked to join, or message was relayed to me. Very disappointed he hadn't been asked to join 30% Club, and I suddenly thought, I'd asked the people I know, but I hadn't thought of asking everybody, in the FTSE or beyond. So I started writing letters to the FTSE 350, the top 350 companies in the country, alphabetically, starting at A, and I got down to HA for Hansen, and I was kind of getting hate mail back from the A's and B's by the time I got to HA, so I gave up on that idea. And people misunderstood. The chairman, they were saying, why are you interfering with my board? What's this got to do with you? I've got a diversity initiative within my HR team. And then I realized that the peer pressure was much more effective, that if they had their colleagues, their peers, the other captains of industry, telling them this was a sensible thing to do and this was part of being a modern business. So that's what we suggest in other countries, that you've got to actually get the chairman talking to each other. Don't go in again the militant approach of waving a big stick and making people, because you tell them. That doesn't work with these companies, which have created a great deal of value, work with their shareholders, feel really on top of their game often. But you say, well, the next 10 years, to be successful then, you need to be utilizing all your talent. They get that. And then you have their friends.
Interesting. So you get the key men, you get the key evolved men on board, and then it's men pressuring men.
Pretty much, yeah.
Interesting.
It's quite simple, really, actually. Sorry, I've burst the bubble. This is all very easy.
So, Helena, tell us about the nanny gap.
What is the nanny gap?
The nanny gap. I read about aren't you behind an effort to get income tax credits for child care for high-income women? I thought that was something that you were focusing on.
It's not something particularly that I focused on. I have actually, in terms of both the gender pay gap here, but also I have, we've worked as one of the things, and also I'm chair of something called Opportunity Now, which is part of the Prince of Wales Business in the Community charities, which is much more focused on, 30% Club is on high potential women. This is focused on all women. But we have been suggesting, and this country has got a very different set of costs around childcare and availability of childcare than just about every other country. So we did do a study a couple of years ago now where we compared the UK with about 8 other OECD countries. And on every other measure, this was looking at access to maternity provisions, where I know in the States you don't really have statutory maternity provisions, and the States stood out a mile on that one. And then the access to paternity care and or paternity leave and how much that's taken up, shared parental leave, but also the cost of childcare. And the UK, it's a quarter of the average disposable income of families is spent on childcare, and it stood out. It was more than double the nearest worst example. And I think that's the one thing that in the UK just looks anomalous. If you're going to say there's one factor that could speed up, accelerate the pace of change around women progressing, and perhaps it should be for everybody. But I haven't particularly focused on it as something for high.
I think I saw it in the context of Opportunity Now, and it is such a hot topic in the United States right now. Maternity leave, paternity leave in Silicon Valley especially. So I actually found this very interesting, but it is considered a limitation in terms of women reaching that 30%. Who has a question? Okay, there's a mic right here. Lara?
Hi, I'm Lara Ayub from Jordan. I'm just very curious to know how you sustained your career as a leader and a CEO, being a mother of, God bless them, 9 children. Did I get that right? Because I have 2 children, and I was a director when I found out I was pregnant, and I was very, vulnerable to, will I be able to sustain my career path? And second question is, what would you advise women that want to be on boards, or what can women do for themselves to get on boards?
So on the first one, I have to confess that my husband's at home, but we both worked until we had our 4th child, and we had then what I thought was kind of a normal conversation between 2 working partners in a marriage about how we were going to make it work, because our 3rd and 4th were very close in age, a year apart, and we were struggling. We never had live-in help. He was a journalist, financial journalist, and he said, look, I'd like to go freelance. I mean, he offered. As we gradually had more children, he ended up not being able to work at all for money and spend much more time looking after. But actually, to me, again, it highlights the fact that a lot of this is about shaking up society and about how, I do believe both parents can have a career, maybe not so much with 9 children. It might be challenging if you were trying to also have a family life as well. But I do think what some of this is about is saying it shouldn't be automatically assumed that, say, the woman's career would come second. And my husband reminds me often, he says, the logical extension of all this work will be that men have more choice as well, that he feels that many men are quite envious of his role. Maybe not everybody would agree with that, but it's quite interesting that he thinks that. On the second, I think there are lots of things that women can do to help. I mean, I certainly think it's very important to have a sponsor. We've realized it is important to get into that club. It's hard to get in through search firms. I think it's hard to break in, for that first important board role. But having somebody who recognizes that you have talents and will promote you with their peers, again, going back to this, let's face it, the group of people who are running the companies, both the CEOs and the chairs, it is a tight-knit community. And sort of knocking on the door and having been taken seriously when you're a bit of an outsider, whether it be because you're a woman or you're from another underrepresented group, is hard. And I find it most effective when someone gets a sponsor and they can achieve that through all sorts of ways, but often, women have approached me and said, and I've known them well, and I've thought it's bizarre that they can't get in to be interviewed even for this position. And I've introduced them to some of the chairmen involved with the 30% Club, and they've said they were amazing. Yeah, let's add them to the list. So I think that's a really important. There are initiatives, for example, Professional Boards Forum in this country, and it started in Norway actually in response to the quota legislation there. Does what sound like very cheesy, but they seem very effective. Sort of fictitious board problems are solved by high potential women, and the chairman come along, and they have like a 40% conversion rate. So trying to get women who aren't going to be on the radar screen in front of chairmen and CEOs is really important, I think.
Another question?
I'll try and be briefer in my answer next time.
There's one right here. Yes, wait for the mic.
Hi, Alim Kamakian from Lebanon. I'm trying to fight also for the 30%. We're following you. What do you advise us in the macho's world of Middle Eastern men's world? How to overcome this?
Yeah, it's a whole nother set of challenges, I realize that. So a 30% club is launching in the Gulf Cooperation countries. The anticipation is later this year. And I certainly can put you in touch with the lady from Lazard's, who's based in Dubai, who is keen to set them up throughout the region. I think it's very important that there's local knowledge and awareness. I have to confess, I know just about everything I know about women in Islam from my son, who is postgraduate Arabic and Persian scholar at Oxford, and he is actually specialized in women in Sufism. So I've learned a little bit by osmosis or listening to him, but I'm very conscious that we're dealing with a whole other set of issues, but I'm very happy to make the connection to Farah.
Any other questions? Yes, back here.
Hi, Claire Skinner from Hydric. One of the observations we've seen when putting shortlists together for board searches, particularly in the States, is some feedback from our colleagues in the US suggesting that too many executive women in Europe are stepping too soon out of their executive role to go plural, and therefore are not big enough for some of the US boards. I wonder if there's your observations on that.
Well, it allows me to touch a little bit on what happened in Norway when they imposed the quota, because a lot of women executive management roles sort of stopped doing those and went plural. And it doesn't become sustainable, obviously. But no, I have had this feedback before, and I do think what we want is enough of a pool. I mean, I'm not interested in just doing this for a few more women to serve on a few more boards. I mean, this is part of a continuum of change that would hopefully lead to many more women at all levels of organizations. And yes, I think the women now, they sense, because there's appetite for non-exec women on boards, to jump ship pretty quickly. I actually think it touches on an interesting point as well, that it would be good to see, and now I'm speaking more as an investor really, more executives serve as non-executives on companies as well, because obviously then it's very relevant. You know, people are still in the zone of the working environment that is rapidly changing. And again, I think there's quite a few things. I think that having more women on boards has been the start, but not in any way the end of a journey towards more radical shape-up of the boardroom.
Have you used your position at Newton to try and influence this position? I mean, this issue in terms of, you know, voting, investing in companies only that have a certain.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. And I see Anne Rich from Aberdeen there, and Aberdeen is part of an investor group that we have within the 30% Club. And actually, this is quite a powerful potential force. So there's an investor group within, I haven't really explained it how it works exactly. There's about 20 different work streams. Some are around women in technology that I heard mentioned earlier. Some is around higher education and women in academia, as well as, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for some cross-fertilization of very high potential women and senior roles in universities to serve on boards. And then on the investor group, there's 23 institutional firms and asset owners, about $10 trillion represented in that room. And what we've been doing is working on how we would constructively engage. Some firms vote against the nomination, the election of the nomination committee chair, or against board directors if it's not taken seriously. And others, we're not that prescriptive about it, just important that we're having a discussion, and that if not enough is done, then investors will vote. It's a bit different than in the States, but in fact, week before last, there was a big conference in London, the International Corporate Governance Network. And what we did was we gathered investors from around the world. So yeah, CalPERS, CalSTRS, the Office of the Comptroller in New York, Canadian investors, Australian investors, and Sophie was there, who was in the room as well. We were talking about how we can make this a global issue and how investors accepting that there are differences clearly in the corporate governance regimes in different countries, but we have collectively a very powerful voice and stake in companies. Companies are owned by their shareholders, not by management usually. So I think there's more that we can do this, and it's one of the, I suppose, the next phase of the 30% Club, because if you can create a global community that's saying, actually, it's time to stop talking about it, that we've seen the results in certain countries, this should be mirrored throughout the world. It's a global phenomenon anyway, the lack of women on the boards or at the top. I think it would be very powerful, and I think the whole could be greater than the sum of the parts. So.
Why are you so against quotas?
So first of all, I don't think they work if what you want is sustainable change. So the Norwegian example is a good one, where it's held up as a poster child for quotas, but actually have fewer women CEOs in Norway than you do in this country of listed companies, fewer women in executive management roles. It's in single digits compared with the European average. And they themselves want to have a 30% club in Norway because they say we need sustainable change. It does help you get that shift in corporate governance right instantly, because you've got a different dynamic in the boardroom. So I'm not knocking that impact. But I say I want to see change for cultural change throughout all organizations and better companies.
But why is that? I mean, is it the case that when quotas are imposed, there isn't necessarily the buy-in that you can get when you campaign to change minds?
Well, I think the most important factor is actually that, we know that we don't have women represented, evenly with men at all levels of the organization. So if you reach down and take those women, somehow you've got to find those women to serve on the boards. So you reach down, take them, and there isn't enough coming up behind them. And I think the somewhat slower, more patient approach, let's face it, we've doubled the percentage of women on boards here in less than 5 years. So it's not been that painful. We've seen a massive acceleration just by having a huge spotlight on it. Media has been really supportive. It's been a real collective effort here in the UK. And I think you'll end up with a much stronger result, better companies and sustainable change. So if you can get it this way, and otherwise you just have the appearance of change.
Right. Yes, question right here.
Hi there. I run a marketing firm. I've got 5 women, 4 men on my board, which was sort of accidental, actually. I went through a complete selection process that was non-gender focused. It was really more on building a completely diverse team of expertise in education and background and ethnicity and country and education. And came out surprisingly with 5 women and 4 men. I'm curious if you've seen some sectors rather than others that are a little bit ahead of a diversity curve in being able to attract and find more diversified boards. Are there sectors that you're seeing good success with right now?
I'm afraid it's going to be the stereotypical, sectors. So finance does particularly badly in terms of finding, particularly now bank boards in this country. It's a struggle to get women who've got the financial experience. We just have too few women at the top of financial organizations, for example. Technology's already been mentioned as a particularly poor track record. The companies or the sectors that do better tend to be the consumer sector. Marks and Spencer's here, the flagship retail company for the UK, iconic British brand. Robert Swannell, the chairman there, actually said at the beginning he didn't want to join the 30% club because it needed to be the 50% club, because 80%, 85% of their customers are women. So much more attuned, typically. Those are gross generalizations. I think it's really interesting what you did. If you're trying to get cognitive diversity broader than just gender, actually I think you end up with often just breaking through it's the traditional mindset that you're sort of trying to break through, and then you'll end up often with considering laterally the candidates, and you naturally create what you did. So you need to advertise your story and inspire others to do the same.
Helena, what's the best advice that you tell your children?
Oh, I'm working it. I'm still waiting to see what the advice would be good. It's kind of cliche. Because you have 9, you have a lot of, if you have 9 children, you have a lot of diversity of the children. So we have, I shouldn't say the smart ones and not quite so academically sort of at the top ones, and actually makes you quite, hopefully not complacent as a parent, more like relaxed to let them be themselves. And I know often, I tell women, try to be more, say, don't be shy of being yourself. Don't be shy of being a woman. Don't submerge your femininity with a sense of fitting in, because actually in today's world, difference is more and more valued, and that would be such an irony. So I just do encourage my children. They are very, very different, and I guess as a parent that's very exciting, but also it's what they're allowed to do, not just allowed, but just encouraged to keep going with. So
And your daughter Flo, who is how old?
20.
20. She released her album today. Is this her first
Her
or
debut
second?
album, yes.
Her debut album today.
I'm getting a plug. I hadn't, expected to get this one in.
I actually have listened to her on YouTube or whatever, or maybe on her site. She's very good. What is her now? Her name is Flo Morrissey.
Flo Morrissey, yeah.
So if you have
sell
any
us in a bit
time in the
more.
next few days, take a listen.
Tomorrow Will Be Beautiful, it's called, which is a lovely title for me, waking up each day, tomorrow will be, or maybe today will be beautiful, will be a better one.
But that's great. Congratulations.
Oh, well,
So
we'll see, but
that's-
it's exciting for her. So, yes, she's her own person doing that. But I have to, will you let me have 1 minute to share the story of when you called to tell me that I was on this, amazingly honored to be this Fortune 50 Greatest Leaders, because Patty tells me this news over the phone. I'm in a cab on the call, just usual, kind of rushing from one thing to another. And I go into that a bit like the radio, winners of a prize, when you start whooping and screaming and just generally being embarrassing, how excited I was. Anyway, what I didn't know is we got cut off on the phone. So I kind of done all this. Thank you, Patty, this is so exciting, sort of stuff. Anyway, Patty thought I just sort of hung up and there was no reaction at all. So I kind of got through all of this and I waited for her to say, oh, well, I'm glad you're pleased. And there was this complete silence. I thought, oh, when did I lose her? Anyway, so I called back and I said, oh, I think we got cut off. She said, well, I was expecting some sort of reaction. It was like a sort of dead silence at the end of the phone as I obviously either fainted with excitement or anyway. So I felt, I make up for it now by reference that I was very honored, but I felt bad that you didn't hear me in that excitement. So.
Well, I'm glad we could call each other back. And I'm very glad that we were able to put you on that list. And thank you so much for coming, Helena.